Hello and welcome everyone to season 2 of the Rejection Diaries. Today I'm joined by Deborah Bailey, and together we're going to chat a little bit about her writing and querying journey and the part that rejection has played in that. Lovely to have you on with us today, Deborah.
Oh, thank you. Good to be here.
Just to start off with, could you tell the people that are listening just a little bit about yourself? Very brief, just what you write, who you are, and a little bit about any notable things that you've done writing-wise.
I guess my name is Deborah Bailey. I write YA contemporary, kind of in that I write thrillers and mystery, and I also write contemporary fantasy. I was a Bright Mentor mentee on the 2020 summer mentorship program, which was an amazing experience. And I signed with an agent with that mentorship book just this last summer. So a long journey with that book that we'll have a chance to talk about later on.
Brilliant. Well, it's lovely to have you. So first of all then, let's talk a little bit about that writing journey. Where did writing start for you? Where did the urge to write books kick off for you?
I think probably like a lot of writers, it's something I did when I was really little. Like I remember my grandparents, when I was like 7 or 8, got rid of an old typewriter that only typed italics. It was like when you needed italics back then, you had to like put your paper in a separate computer that had italics, and they were getting rid of it. So I was like, mine. And I wrote out little stories on like that really scratchy typing paper and put them in construction paper covers and made my mother read them. Bless her. And she did. And tried to find nice things to say about them. And kind of kept on writing all the way through university. And I actually first attended university to study writing and got about 1 semester into that writing program and ended up dropping out. I just hit major writing block, like my dream, and here it was. And I felt so much pressure on myself and just second guessing everything. I ended up dropping out of university and took a year off, and I was living in the States at that point and kind of traveled and took odd jobs and just kind of found things to write about, I guess. And then I ended up going back to university, living in Florida, and then came to the UK to do a master's and started a PhD, and had always known that I wanted to work in publishing somehow. And I ended up working for an academic publisher. And kind of by the time I decided a PhD wasn't for me, I enjoyed working for an academic publisher. And so that by then it had been about 10 years since dropping out of the undergraduate college program. And I read an amazing book, you know, like the first time I really had time to sit down with fiction again after being so immersed in academia. And it was like, hey, I used to want to do this. I think I want to try writing a book. Yeah. It was like, little did I know, you know, and it just kind of reignited the passion in me. And that was probably about 10 years ago again. So a long journey from being 7 or 8 to now. I mean, that was something that was always there, but it kind of dipped in and out and took different priorities at different times. So. And so little 7-year-old me would be proud of me to know that I stuck with it.
Yeah, amazing. And so over the last 10 years or so then, what kind of projects have you been working on? Has it been one novel or has it been a few different ones? You know, has there been false starts? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think when I first decided to get back into writing, I was writing science fiction and fantasy. And I was both incredibly lucky and a bit of strange timing because I heard from a friend about the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop, which is like a really kind of, you know, big science fiction and fantasy writers workshop. And I decided, yeah, I'll apply, thinking, you know, most people take a couple tries to get in. And I had never written short stories before. Like the novel I've been working on had been a novel kind of at that point. And I took a class on writing the science fiction short story and wrote 2 short stories for my application, thinking I just want the higher tier rejection. So I know maybe some point I'll get in. And I got in. And I was like, what? I'm what? So I spent 6 weeks in California and studied with like Holly Black and Cassie Clare and Ted Chiang and Jeffrey Ford and Delia Sherman. And it was amazing. And I was such a newbie. And I feel like in some ways, I'm so glad I learned everything. But on the other hand, it was wasted on me because I was still like, what's the character arc? What's the scene? And it was like, an advanced workshop. So when I left there, it was kind of like a stack of notes. Like I was throwing out clothes so I could bring notes back with me in my suitcase type thing. And then it took me probably 2 years at least to just sit down and unpack and figure out how to use what I'd learned. And at that point, I was working on a YA kind of portal fantasy book. And it was terrible. Like I made all the mistakes in that book, but you need to. Like my goal in that book was just to finish it and edit it. Like I'd always just kind of started novels, and then when I got to the end of Act 1, oh, it's not really working. I'll try something else. I'll go into another project. This one, it was like, no, you must finish and get it out the door. That was like one thing they hammered at Clarion was like, writers finish their stuff. You finish it, you learn more from the editing, and then you move on. You will never have a career if you just endlessly fiddle with one thing and never finish. Just finish it. So I'd never actually edited something before, like had a finished draft that I went through and tried to figure out how to make it better. So it took me 2 years to actually edit that novel and 2 different drafts. And it was the first time I'd had beta feedback on a whole novel. And it was the first time that I ever really had to sit down and be like, okay, if I change this character's mood, if this character feels differently in this scene, wait a minute, then they don't say that. And then the other character doesn't say that. And then 3 scenes down the line, that doesn't happen anymore. Wait, if that doesn't happen, then there goes that and that, and then I don't have my climax anymore. Uh-oh. How did my whole book just fall apart by someone not smiling in the 3rd scene? The whole figuring out how the plot threads work. You pull on this. Why is that moving? And that's what editing that book was like, was just seeing it fall apart in my hands again and again and again. I'm kind of crying each time and staring at myself in the mirror and saying, do you want to do this? Yes. And going back to the computer and saying, okay, we are going to do this. All those other people on Amazon figured out how to do this. All those other people who've written books figured this out. Do you really think they can do something you can't do? If you think that, then why are you even wasting your time? You just have to figure it out. And I remember like sitting there like, someone tell me what is the right plot choice here? Just story gods, give me the lightning bolt. Tell me which is the right choice. And that was such a big light bulb with that book that came from within, was that something that Ted Chiang had said in Clarion, that you just have to figure out the story you really want to tell. That's the only right answer. Deep down, the story of these people and the emotional journey that they are taking, that is your lodestone. That is your guide, that arc. And really coming to understand that as, okay, in this scene, how does it move them along their arc? Do these events push them along it, or is it getting too off to the side? So 2 years, I had a done book and a query and a terrible query. I mean, a page and a half, rhetorical questions everywhere, probably gave away the ending. I might have been in first person in the first draft of the query. I mean, every query mistake out there. And I took some workshops and kind of, everything. And I was ready. I had my query tracker membership. I had all the agents listed in order of priority. I had a brand new querying email address to keep it separate so it wouldn't keep pinging me all the time. And I started querying. And out of 78 queries, I had 3 full requests and 5 partials. Terrible. It was a bad book. Like looking back on it now.
Though, for first time, isn't it? I think for those who are first time queriers, actually, I think that return is actually quite good.
Is it?
Yeah,
okay, I was just like looking at the 10% is what you should aim for, and I was like, okay, I mean, it was a portal fantasy, which is still a hard sell and was probably harder then. It was like 135,000 words. And it was a very still messy plot because even as I edited it, I still refused to kill my darlings. So it was like, but I like that scene. I'll find some way to make it fit. So like the plot was still like zig, 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 like a Venn diagram of all my favorite things instead of an actual coherent story. And finally, with the last kind of full, the agent sent back really great feedback. And she was like, your writing is beautiful. I love the characters, your dialogue, all that. Just the plot is really, you just have too many things. Just too many things. Just, you don't need 5 main plot lines, maybe 2, So I realized it was time to kind of just trunk that one and think about how to simplify it. And kind of while I'd been querying that, I'd moved on to a new book. Because I just don't think in sitting around waiting for querying. And, therein lies madness if you have nothing else to think about but waiting for your emails to come in. And I'd finished by that time the full draft, the first draft of that kind of YA contemporary fantasy. And I looked at it and I realized I'd done all the same things that the agent had pointed out. 5 main plot lines. Yes, let's have 3 inciting incidents and 2 climaxes and this character and these things that dip in and out. And I was like, okay, there's just not even any point in going on with this one until I really figure out what is the story I want to tell. I don't know I'm a pantser. So it's kind of like you get to the end and then you figure it out. But by then you fall in love with all the different plot lines. So I was like, okay, I need some serious learning to do. And I just, kind of read a bunch of craft books. I read like Story, I think it's by McGee. Is his name Robert McGee?
Robert McGee, yeah.
Yeah, I read Writing for Emotional Impact by Carl Iglesias. I read 20 Master Plots and How to Write Them. I read Save the Cat, Techniques of the Selling Writer, which is an amazing book, kind of writing the breakout novel, just kind of plot, structure, which was clearly where I was falling down. I didn't do all the exercises, but I did some. And when I came out of that, I realized if I was ever going to get over kind of my addiction to kitchen sink novels where you just toss in elements whenever you don't know what to do, I know a new plot element will solve the problem. I decided that as a challenge, I was going to write a small novel. And I gave myself 1 setting and 5 characters, and that's it. And it was a YA science fiction, and it was about a family who had hired like a charter to move to a new planet, and it got hijacked. So they were stuck on this spaceship with, they had no way to, they were traveling faster than light, so there was no outside communication, and it was just these people stuck with one problem. There's no way to bring in anything else, no supernovas, no, anything. I was stuck with these people, this situation, this plot. And it was so fun to write. And it was so easy. And it was like, is this what it's supposed to be like when you only have one plot line and you know the story you're trying to tell at the outset? When you don't just go in and being like, maybe I'll write something about these 20 million things and figure it out as I go along. And I came out of that and felt like it didn't need 2 years and a whole bunch of edits. It was actually in pretty good shape. In the end, I decided not to do anything with it because as it turned out, the main character was non-binary. And I felt like that wasn't my space. It wasn't my story to tell, to put out there with that as a main character when other people could tell it with more authenticity. I never set out to write a non-binary main character. That just turned out to be who they were. But in the end, it was a great experience. I learned so much from that novel, but not something that it was right to pursue. So on the back of that, I decided as I was kind of coming to that hard decision, I came up with the idea of what became my novel that I was mentored with, the one that I found my agent with. And it was completely different from anything I'd written before. It was contemporary. I'd never written a contemporary before. I was in science fiction and fantasy through and through. But the idea just caught me. And it was just okay, I'm going to try it. Why not? And it was, again, a story that I just knew how I wanted to tell from the outset. But it was really hard to write a contemporary. You don't realize, I think, when you write science fiction and fantasy, how much plot you hide in the world building and how much story space the setting is almost like a character. And without that, it was really weird. This is reality. Readers know it. It just felt weird balancing all those elements. And in my head, I'd had it set up with a big twist ending, Gone Girl, it's going to be a huge twist. And got it done, again, came out really easily. It was really, wow, I think I might have cracked this plot thing. And sent out about 30 queries and had a 50% request rate, which was night and day. It was okay, my last one, in the first week, I'd already had more full requests than my other one had in 6 months. It was and then the rejections started coming in that the plot just wasn't working. And this is why I think it's good to do batches and not just do everything, because after about 15 fulls, including an R&R, that the plot just wasn't there and the twist ending kind of wasn't working. And that's kind of what the R&R agent, wanted to kind of make it a bit more conventional, linear, straightforward structure and all that. And I was yes, I could do this. Yes, it's happening, and kind of rushed through it in the way you're not supposed to do because it was happening. And and then when that came back as a reject, that R&R, I was okay, it's time to take a break and think about the changes I made. What did they mean? What did I really want the story to be? Is it time to move on? Is this just, as my first contemporary? But I loved the idea. I absolutely loved the premise. And I'd had such an enthusiastic reaction from agents who loved the premise. I knew I was really onto something with this idea. So I wanted to pursue it. So I applied for a mentorship through the YA for YA program, which isn't running anymore. But I was picked by Rachel Cade, who wrote Vampire, what is it called? Morganville Vampires and the Stillhouse Lake series and everything. And who was going to work with me on the whole book as a mentorship. And it was amazing. And then we got 2 chapters in and she got ill again. Her cancer came back and we had to put it on hold, which was fine. Obviously, you have no problem with that. So while I was waiting for that, I wrote another draft of a new book. And I think I sat down for that book and I said, I want to write a book about YouTube pranksters who kill someone when their prank goes wrong. And the book I turned out with was nothing at all like that. I still don't know how I ended up with that book. And I set out querying that. And again, I had a really good kind of request rate and glowing feedback, but it was all of the I love it, just not enough type thing. So while that was going on, it was clear that Rachel was not going to be able to finish the mentorship. And it kind of came to a very sorrowful, but, obviously amicable end. And she was very encouraging about applying for other mentorships, which is how I ended up with the Right Mentor mentorship. And I still remember writing my application and just laying all that out and why do you want a mentorship at this time? And just being I don't know what to do. I'm like, this book, I love this idea. It's been through these, it's been through this, it's been through that. I think this might fix it, but, just, a little bit of bouncing ideas around and just helping me figure it out would be, wonderful. And I was picked by Brandy Wood Snow, who, is absolutely amazing. She, the story is set in South Carolina, and she's from South Carolina. So I think she knew kind of the nuances and the intricacies of the setting and how that influenced the characters and kind of what I was trying to do. And she's so strong in structure and kind of plot. And that was like just what I needed. She was just like, before we even touch the manuscript, we are figuring out what story you are telling here and kind of work it through like that and figure it all out. And I'd never worked like that before. I was still just to dive in and figure out the story as I went along. And it was such a revelation just working that way. And I think, people say try different ways, but I think if she had just handed me this thing and been like, homework in 2 weeks, give me these things and then we can talk about it. I think having that accountability to try something else was so different than if I just tried it on my own. I think it made me freer and more open to that kind of plotting, experience. And we did the big edit. I think I ended up rewriting over half the book with her, which is a very tight time frame for the mentorship. I'm just like, but I think it helped that I knew what I was doing each scene of the way because we planned it all out. Got to the end, had a really good showcase request rate, and sent out another round of queries on the back of that. And again, had over a 50% query request rate, but again, kind of more rejects. And again, they were the really nice rejects. I love it. Just not enough. And one of them even said, I'm trying to think of some constructive feedback that I can tell you about how to maybe fix the book, what it is that's making me say no, but I got nothing. It's just not for me. So I kind of said, 30 queries again, and then I'll take a break and see, 15 was enough to know if you're getting a consistent type of feedback. And I was. And by that time, as I was sending out those queries, I'd started writing gone back to that messy, not the original book that took me 2 years, but the one I'd wrote after it, the YA contemporary fantasy that I realized I'd made all the same mistakes. And I was working on that. And I had a draft of that. That was kind of going through beta readers and everything like that. So when I decided to take another pause on my Right Mentor book, I applied to the Tin House YA workshop, which is like a really intense kind of 5-day workshop where you're in a group of like 9 people and you workshop a huge chunk of your novel and just get some fresh feedback, see what, they made of it. And I did that and got amazing kind of insight. A lot of them thought it was working too, but some ideas about, I think it was interesting because I gave them the synopsis and said, I'm kind of more interested about the synopsis and what you think of the overall storyline than the opening. I was pretty sure the opening as a piece worked by that point. And some really good ideas about what they thought the story was going to do versus what I had it doing and things like that. So it's like, okay, I think it might need a edit. I don't know. Am I making it different or better? That's such a hard judgment call. You can incrementally edit your way to a whole new book and it not be any better, just different. So I was like, So I was kind of sending the contemporary fantasy, out to beta readers and kind of getting their feedback and everything. And I was actually ready to kind of put the Right Mentor book away for a while. And then my friend was like, wait a minute, why are you thinking of doing that? From what you've told me, occurring feedback, that is the good rejections. You want them to say, just not for me. They're not saying plot. They're not saying character. They're not saying anything actionable. You've just not hit the right person. And I was like, yeah, but if there is something wrong, I don't want to burn my way through agents and then 2 years when I do another edit, not have anyone to query because they've all rejected it. And she was like, well, why don't you, do one more round? Because this book, the contemporary fantasy, she's like, this will probably be, get an agent with this one, and then you can bring out the other one and do the edits with the agent. You might never query it again. You're thinking that this new one won't get you an agent either. It's like, oh, yeah, I am, aren't I? Okay, I'll go out on a limb and say I might get an agent with that other one. And then, yes, I would have someone to talk about it. So she was like, I know you've held back in all your querying. You're like those last favorites. When you do batches, you never kind of query all your dream agents in one go. You always kind of salt them through all your batches. So it's like, so if you really are going to quit, blast out one last round kind of queries to all those dream agents, because why not? Why not? And that's when I got the call. And she loved the writing. She loved the idea. She loved everything. She still saw a big edit to kind of make it in a more kind of traditional thriller vein. It was kind of straddling a quasi-mystery, quasi-thriller, which I think was kind of the issue. And she kind of asked me, so, how would you feel about taking on a big edit? And do you have any ideas? And it was like all the things in the 7 months since Tin House that I'd been mulling over in the back of my head. It was like, well, funny you should ask that, because actually, you're like, yes, let's do this thing. And I'm just finishing up the first draft of those edits now, and we're aiming to go on sub in the spring. So 3 years with that Right Mentor book, 2 mentorships, 3 different versions, and 3 rounds of querying of about 30 queries each to get there. And that's just that book that did it. But yeah, I think it was worth it. Sometimes you just know an idea is right, and it's the story that's in your heart and you want to tell, and you just have to stick with it. But you also have to know when it's right to walk away and work on something else.
Yeah. And it's wonderful.
My epic trek.
No, it's wonderful though that you stuck with it all, for all that time, and you went through so many projects and stuff. Because I know that it's so hard for people to continue when they get a few rejections in the bank. So it's a real credit to you that you managed to persevere for so long. And things are.
I think you just tell yourself, piss or get off the pot. Are you going to stick with it? Or are you going to say, a rejection is going to make me walk away? And every time I was tempted, I just, would look on Amazon or go to a bookstore and say, all these people did it. Do you really think that they can do something you can't do? And if the answer is yes, stop. If not, you have to keep going. There's no way but through.
Yeah.
And that was the thing I just kept telling myself again and again when I needed it. That kept me going. Was, I guess, stubborn and refusal to let those people do something I couldn't do. No.
But I do think that's what's needed, though. That's the number one quality that's needed. And you gave us so many good little bits of tips and advice there as well. From the bit about you have to finish the novel and get it out to the one you were just saying there with do you really think that you can write a book as well as the millions of books that are on Amazon? And it's so good and so inspiring to listen to you talking about your journey.
Pain can help anyone else. Let it.
No, it's brilliant. So I just wanted to ask you before we finish talking, do you have any sort of good tips or advice that you could summarize in a few sentences for people who are currently going through a tough time and have had a lot of rejections?
Yeah, I'd say 3 main things that I found overall to be the most helpful. And one of them is it can be so hard walking away from a project, especially when you know it still needs work, but write the next book. I wrote so many books in between different drafts of my Right Mentor book. And, one of them I had an offer from a small press on. One of them, the contemporary fantasy that I was working on, it was so funny how it happened because I'd sent that to a major contest here in the UK. And I heard I made the long list 2 days after I signed with my agent, and I couldn't take the spot because it's for unagented writers only. But so things were happening with that book. So if I just worked on that one book, I wouldn't have had those other books to query. I wouldn't have learned everything I learned writing those other books. Each book you write forces you to confront new challenges. It gets you out of that rut. You see that pattern of moving threads and how stories work under the hood so much better by starting new projects. So when you come back, you have a bigger bank of knowledge. You have that better, like a story writing algorithm to run in your brain. You know how. So the books come out more fully formed because you can see as you're writing, oh, if I do this now, that means that. You don't have to write the book and then say, wait, I did that. How did I get there? So each book you iterate better. So definitely move on to the next project. Even if you'll come back. It took me about 4 years to come back to the YA contemporary fantasy. But when I did, the first draft was, long list award worthy versus being an incomprehensible mess when I wrote it, this couple years ago. So that tells you how much you learn just by moving on and challenging yourself with new things. So I think the other thing is time away between drafts is essential. You need to be able to see it clearly. I know every time I rushed that first R&R, felt a bit rushed, in the mentorship, which is just the nature of it. I probably undertook too big an edit for the time frame. Every time I rushed, and I rushed with the first book and just said, no, I'm not stopping till it's query ready, and probably should have taken 6 months away. I think you need to be able to see it clearly. You need to be emotionally ready to kill your darlings and to say, wait a minute, it made sense in my head. And when I read it, I felt the emotion I had when I was writing it. You need to see what's just on the page. You need to be, pretty clear-headed. So time away. And that's so hard because I think writing and getting published, it's such a dream and you just want to make it happen now. And you just, so much advice is you just push on, that it's hard to say that taking time away from a project is another form of pushing on. It's another essential stage in the process. But that's a perfect time to write a first draft of a next book, So I think what I found as a writing habit is first draft, edit, first draft, so I probably have 2 or 3 projects that I'm cycling through different phases. And that kind of builds in that time away into the process. And I think the third thing is beta readers and outside input. It can be so hard to let go, and it can be so hard to hear hard things, home truths about your work. They don't understand, or they're just not getting it. Well, you're not there in the bookstore with the reader telling them or giving them that story. And I think one of the things that's really hard is to get that reader perspective. How does a reader who doesn't know anything take the story? What are they running with? What assumptions are they making? What pieces are they putting together that's you've never outwardly stated? And understanding how readers are taking your story is really essential to crafting a story and understanding what bits that you leave out as well as what goes in. I know I tended to put everything right in there in my earliest drafts, just spell it all out. And when I started, because punching holes in the story is something, a piece of advice came from Clary. You have to punch holes in and leave space for the reader to figure things out. When I really understood how to do that, that's when I could tell I was really starting to get somewhere. But I also think beta readers and outside input, especially if you have a community of writers, it's hard. Rejection is hard. Writing is hard. Going into that bookstore, even when you're telling yourself all these people did it, they still all managed to do something you're struggling with. It's hard. And finding people who are going through the same thing and have the same dream and want it with the same burning intensity as you, you lift one another up and you keep one another strong and you cry together when you need to. And it just makes the journey, so much more, enjoyable and worth it. And then when it does happen for you or for one of them, it's the best feeling in the world. And seeing good things happen to other writers that you've been through the journey with it almost feels better than when it happens to you. I think when a good thing happens to your kid, you feel it more than, it's the same way with your writing friends. When something good happens to them, it's just amazing. And, just being part of that community, I think it's one of the most important things you can do for yourself as a writer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was everything you were saying there. I was like, yep. So that's us come to the end of the episode, Deborah. But thanks so much for joining us and for sharing so honestly and insightfully what your journey's been like. I'm sure a lot of people will take a lot of wisdom from that, but also a lot of heart from the ability you have to persevere and how you've managed to finally get to a stage where you'll be going on submission soon, I would imagine.
Yeah, hopefully in the spring. Yeah. I think, but if you want to do it, it's in your heart. It's who you are. Find a way,
Yeah.
Find a way. Don't give up. That's the only way you'll never get there,
Yeah. And that's a perfect note to end on, I think. So thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks, Deborah.
Okay, thank you. Bye.